whatever gets you through the day, whatever keeps these vocal cords buttery smooth. Welcome to Book Talk, Etc., a podcast bound to grow your TBR. I'm Tina from TBR, Etc.
And I'm Hannah from Handpicked Books.
This is a conversational podcast about books and more from two Midwest mood readers who are easily distracted by new releases. And today we are talking about all things horror.
If you enjoy listening, we'd love for you to follow us on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. And if you have a quick minute, please consider leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts or sharing us on social media. It truly helps us connect with other book lovers.
Hey everyone, it is the start of a new month. Happy October! And because it's the start of a new month, we wanted to take the time to invite you to join us on Patreon. Patreon is an online membership platform that gives you a way to financially support our podcast. And for $5 a month, you get access to all of our bonus content. By becoming a Patreon member, you'll get our new bonus content, but also our backlist bonus content, as well as an invitation to our Patreon community. I always say this, but if you've ever wanted your reading to be more of a social experience, this is a great way to find that connection. For $5 a month, you'll get access to 2 bonus episodes and 1 recorded event, as well as invites to our BTE Discord server and Facebook group. We also host a monthly community read on Discord. It's a text-based book club that feels like a big group chat. And our bonuses in October include our What's in the Mailbag episode, where we share the books that have recently made their way into our homes, another installment of Niche Novels, where Hannah and I share overly specific book recommendations, and our live event, Mood Reader Happy Hour, where you get to hang out with me and Hannah and Jonathan and likely one of our children at least, and chat with the other patrons about what you've recently been reading. And our October community read is an exciting one. It's Blue Sisters by Coco Mellers. If this sounds like something you'd be interested in, we would love to have you. Head to patreon.com/booktalk, etc., or look for the link in our show notes. And thank you so much for your support. Hi, Hannah.
Hey, Tina. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
I am doing good. I am very hydrated. I've got my big water bottle here. I know you've got a nice warm cup of tea over there.
I do. I got
Perfect
tea.
for October 1.
I know. I don't even know what's in here. John just made it for me. It could be anything. Maybe it's like funny tea. I don't know. If I get weirder as the episode progresses, let me know. No, I think it's like, I actually have no idea. I know there's honey in here. But yeah, I bought him that tea of the month for Father's Day. So we have like a bunch of little like random teas. And so it's good, whatever it is.
Did you hear that Sips By went out of business? They did like a tea subscription. And I feel like a lot of book people used their tea subscription, and I was going to get some tea from them recently, and I saw that you can no longer get tea from them. They are no longer a going concern.
That is a bummer, but you could, if you'd like, use what I brought previously as a Loving Lately, the Plum Deluxe. That's where we got Jonathan's tea of the month. And it's fun. They send some really good ones. And I'm not even the biggest tea person. I'm very, very new to the genre, if you will. And so it's been nice, though. It works really, like, surprise, surprise. Last week, my voice was not helping us get through the episode. It was a big struggle. And Jonathan's like, because you literally only drink cold drinks, like ice cold water. I don't even drink hot coffee. So he's like, of course your vocal cords are like begging for a little help. So that's what I'm up to.
Maybe you should just start drinking, like, I know some people drink like hot water with lemon.
I could.
Not as fun as tea, but
I know. But hey, you know what I mean? Whatever gets you through the day, whatever keeps these vocal cords buttery smooth.
Exactly.
Oh my God. All right. Well, I'm excited to talk about today's topic. We are just calling it sort of a broad horror episode. I don't know that we've done one this specifically before on Book Talk, etc. If you're not a big horror reader, I invite you to stay with us because we're not just sharing sort of extreme spooky horror. In Book Talk, we're going to talk about horror light, horror medium, and then some of the more scary, spooky stuff. So hopefully there's something for anybody who's wanting to try horror. And with that, I'll actually hop right into my Loving Lately, if that's okay with you, because my Loving Lately is very relevant to today's episode. It is a horror book compilation. And I know you know about this, Hannah. It is written by Sadie Hartman, who you probably know if you like
Yes.
horror. Her handle is Mother Horror. And the book that I am bringing today as my loving lately is 101 Horror Books to Read Before You're Murdered, which she
I
actually,
love that.
it's so funny. And she talks about it in the foreword to the lists and things about why she named it that. She has curated a selection of modern horror books, including plenty of deep cuts. And what I've been loving, I actually got this idea from one of our patrons, Rebecca. She shared that she's making her way through the books on the list. And I thought, absolutely, yes, that's for me. And so I ordered it. The print copy is on its way, but I also got a copy from Libby. But I understand there's illustrations and it's like a visually appealing book. So I can't wait to see it. But what I like about this compilation is that there are books she enjoyed. She's not calling this the definitive list every horror reader must read. It's a list that readers can use as their jumping off point into horror right now. She calls it a representation of where horror has been, where it's now, and where it's going. And I just sort of skimmed it just because I was curious what it included. And I feel like there's so much to learn about the nuances of horror. And I can't wait to fully dive in. And of course, with any good book list or book recommendation compilation, there's a list at the end. I am shocked and stunned. I've only read 13 on this list of 101. I thought I
Wow.
considered myself a seasoned veteran when it comes to horror reading, but that just means there's more to discover. And I'm super excited about that. So, my loving lately has been looking at and attempting to begin to go through the 101 horror books to read before you're murdered by Sadie Hartman.
Gosh, that's so fun. And I also love a book like this or a list like this that you can use as a reading challenge. I think so
Yes.
many of us are motivated by having something like that to accomplish or work toward. And that could be really fun, especially considering horror is such a wide range. So, yeah, whether you're new to it or whether you're a seasoned reader,
Hmm.
it sounds like it could still be something that you enjoy no matter what. So,
Yes. And I love that it's for something for everybody. Like I said, I thought I
mhm.
was seasoned, but I'm like, there's some on here I've never heard of. So I'm like, what are these books? I wonder why she picked them. And I haven't read this book cover to cover yet, her recommendation. So I'm really excited to like continue to add to my TBR.
Yeah, and I feel like this could also just be a good option for like a coffee table book. I love a good coffee
Yeah,
table book,
same.
especially one that
Yes.
fits your vibe so that when people come into your home and they're sitting on your couch and they see this book, they're like, "Oh, what's that about?" And then they get to
Hmm.
kind of get to know you a little bit through, what you have sitting on your coffee table.
Oh, I
So,
love it. Yeah, I'm always nosy too. I'm like, what do you got over there?
yep.
What book is
Yep.
it?
Me too. Oh, me too. For
Classic.
sure. Well, I'm going to take a total left turn and
Okay.
I'm going to go into skincare
Nice.
because I have really been enjoying this journey that I'm on. I am new to more complex skincare. I typically previously just used, my CeraVe cleanser and sometimes put on some moisturizer and called it a day. But I have been trying to take really good care of my skin. And so what I have been using lately, this is a part of my evening skincare routine, and it is the Bioma Sensitive Retinol Oil.
Mhm.
And I don't know if you have ever used this brand before, Tina. This is the first thing that I have used by them. This product makes me feel so soft and clean before I go to bed. I put this on after my cleanser and or my toner and before my moisturizer, which is actually kind of nice, especially to people who are newer to like a full skincare lineup. It actually says that on the back of the bottle. It's like, use this in between your cleanser and your moisturizer. And I'm like, okay, got it. And that has been working really, really well. It feels so nice and makes my skin feel so soft in the morning. And it's like completely absorbed in the morning. My skin just feels soft when I wake up instead of, having that residue on my skin. I was a little worried because I have normal to oily skin. So I was concerned that this oil product would make my skin feel even more oily. But lo and behold, I listened to what the dermatologists tell you,
Mhm.
which is that regular moisturizer and oil treatment actually makes it so that your skin doesn't produce as much yucky oil on its own. And I have found that to be true so far. So I feel like this helps actually keep my skin more balanced and clean overall. And I haven't been getting as much like oil on my skin in my T-zone, which is where I get it since using this product. So I guess that says something. I haven't tried any of their other products, but I'm eager to since I have loved this so much. And that is the Bioma Sensitive Retinol Oil.
I am so proud of you on your skincare journey because
Thank
I feel
you.
like when we started, one of the things you said, you're like, I'm not like that into skincare. And I said, that's okay. It's a
Yeah.
book podcast. So,
Sure,
you don't
sure.
have to be, but I'm very interested in your journey. I actually don't have this type of product in my lineup, so I might have
Mm-hmm.
to take a look. I've never used this brand. So
Yeah.
maybe I'll be purchasing one of your recommendations. It wouldn't be the first time.
Yes. Oh, I love getting recommendations from you too. I look forward to our Loving Lately segments every week because it's so nice to get recommendations from trusted people on this kind of stuff. So
Yeah,
yeah.
and it's fun too because we always ask our patrons each week, like, "Hey, what have you been loving lately?" Because sometimes you run
Yes.
out of ideas. I'm like, "What should I?" Not that I'm out here trying and buying new things, but sometimes I'm like, "Oh, let me try this TV show that I never would have heard about." So a good
Exactly.
time all around. Now, I'm going to transition into our latest read. It is the first Tuesday of the month, so we are sharing our thoughts on our latest community read. We had the
Mm-hmm.
chat last night in our Discord, and it was fun. I have to say, the book we read together was We Came to Welcome You by Vincent Tirado. So that's our joint latest read today. And I got to tell you, I was nervous going into it
Me
because this
too.
wasn't a 5-star read for me. And I thought, oh gosh, you know, I hope I didn't make them read a book that they're going to dislike, right? Because that's always sort
Mm-hmm.
of a bit of the challenge when you're picking books for a discussion that you've not yet read because you don't know what you're getting.
Mm-hmm.
This, I looked in our Discord, and you can tell by how many comments there are. This was the third most discussed book in 2 years of our community reads. So I'm
Yes.
really excited. We had an awesome conversation.
Yeah, we really did. It was really fun and I think and we actually had some mixed ratings across the board,
Hmm.
which I think added value to the conversation
Yes.
because it was such an open conversation and people were able to say, well, I didn't like this, or well, I actually really liked that because, and even if you're not agreeing, with certain people in the group, which you don't have to, it does help offer a different perspective and make you even appreciate things in the book that you still may not have liked, but now
Hmm.
you understand, oh, well, there was a reason, or well, some people like, X, Y, and Z, or this aspect of the story. So I think that that's what makes reading in community so special because it just makes for such a richer reading experience, getting to share these thoughts with everyone.
Exactly. And this book is called like suburban horror. And it was cool because a couple of the people had said, I don't read horror typically. So this was not
Hmm.
something I would have picked up, but I'm so glad I did. I tried something new. And it was fun to discuss just horror as a genre. Like, oh, does that often happen where you sort of have to do this or that when you're reading? And so I feel like
Yes.
we had such a good time discussing. And I'm so thankful we did that discussion before we recorded, because let me tell
Yes, me
you
too.
about the book so that, the listeners can be filled in. So We Came to Welcome You is suburban horror about a couple, Sol and Alice, who move into their dream home in a gated community named Mainless Grove. Sol has had a very rough year. She's dealing with accusations of plagiarism in the workplace, a homophobic father, a drive to drink, and her mental health. All of this is sort of spiraling throughout the novel. Worse yet, they move in and their new neighbors are pushy. They are a little too friendly, and Sol has no interest in joining their homeowners association despite their incessant invitations. She's not interested in the bizarrely detailed contracts or their never ending microaggressions. But her wife Alice simply attributes their pursuit to the community invested in a neighborly spirit, which only serves to irritate Sol more. Then weird stuff starts happening. There's things in the house, the stairs start disappearing, there's some stuff with trees. And Sol starts to wonder if her social paranoia isn't built on something more sinister. Yet Sol's fears are dismissed by her wife, who starts to embrace their new home and their new neighbors, which obviously is not great for Sol. And then things sort of go from there. Hannah and I think felt pretty similarly about it. We didn't chat
Hmm.
while we were reading, but obviously connected a bit before the community read. But again, chatting with the community read really helped me solidify my thoughts. But tell me a little bit, or tell the listeners a bit about how you liked it.
Yeah. So when I had first finished it, I was feeling pretty. apathetic about it,
Mhm.
and I appreciated some aspects of it. I tend to enjoy suburban horror. I thought that this book provided a lot of good tension and like creepy. It was creepy, right? And I thought that the author did a good job of writing that and making it feel scary in
Mhm.
that respect, even though I wouldn't consider this like a super scary book. I just thought that the creepy factor was well done, but the main character really frustrated me.
Mhm.
And although I would say that that is still true and that did inhibit my enjoyment of the book on a personal level, that also provided really good discussion. And I did end up feeling a little bit differently about our main character and having, I don't know, just a different perspective about
Yeah.
maybe why I was frustrated with the main character after we chatted about it. Did you feel like after the discussion that maybe swayed your opinions about the book at all?
Yeah, I think it did. I flip-flopped a lot with this, and even when I was reading, I was flip-flopping because
Mhm.
sometimes I was like, "Oh, this is 4 stars. This is good," right? And then I was like,
Yeah.
"Ooh, I'm down to 2. I'm not loving my time here." I think
Mhm.
overall I landed at 3, and the reason, though, is I think the author did a really, really good job getting the reader to see the exhaustion that women of color, especially queer women, have to
Mhm.
go through in all of the different areas of their lives and the uncertainty and the other kind of stressful areas that come with that because Soul, it felt tiring to be in her mind, and I
Yes.
think the author did such a good job with painting that picture where it's
Agreed.
like to the point where I was viscerally being like, "Oh, I don't wanna finish this,"
Same.
let me bump it up because I wanted to
Yeah.
get out of her head, but God, what a privilege, right, that I'm able to do that and that it's fiction, and so really good job by the author of painting that. This is an own voices book, and I have to imagine a lot of, what was included is lived experience. It is messy,
Mhm.
and it's complicated, and it made me feel icky, but again, I think that takes good writing. I was very pleasantly surprised by a lot of the discussion of intersectionality. I
Yeah.
liked Soul's relationship with her wife because it felt true to me. It wasn't all roses and happiness, like, they fought and went at it, but then
Yeah.
had their own ways of making it up to each other. I think for the horror elements, they were interesting and creative. I sort of just glossed over it and I was like, okay, creepy, like you had said. It ups the creepiness factor if you're a very analytical person and you want answers with why things are happening. As with a lot of horror, you kind of just have to go with it. But I was okay with that. I think overall, if you like social horror, you could give this book a shot.
Yeah, I agree. I also did have some issues with that you touched on a little bit with kind of the semantics of the horror, like the rules, if you will. And
Oh,
also
yes.
there were some plot elements which I won't go into for the sake of spoiling, but again, in talking about it, they were like, "Oh, I thought that this happened because of this," or "I thought, this happened because it proved this point," which were things that I hadn't thought of.
Hmm.
And I was like, "Well, if that's true, I like the book more now because I think
Yeah.
that that's a really good point that these people were bringing up." And so, yeah, I feel like I was feeling really apathetic about it. And then after finishing it, I actually had a lot of appreciation for the thought that obviously went into creating the characters the way the author did and doing certain things with the plot to make certain points. And that really made me appreciate it more. And I
Hmm.
think you made a good point. If you want to try some suburban horror, especially some own voices books, then I think this would be a great one to try.
Yep. That was We Came to Welcome You by Vincent Torrado. And thanks to our patrons for chatting with us because we had stars all over the board and it was a really, really fun
Yes.
time. But
So fun.
anyway, alrighty, let's talk about horror. I have
Let's
a hard
talk
time
about
saying
it.
this. Horror,
Horror.
horror. So what is it? Why do we like it? What kinds of horror do we like? And do you want to read the definition? I like what you grabbed here.
Yeah. So to start with, what is horror? So, horror is a genre designed specifically with the purpose to evoke fear, dread, and shock through its storytelling. For a book or a movie to be classified as horror, its primary intention really has to be to create this overall atmosphere of fear and dread. Key elements are going to include darkness, the unknown, and sometimes, but not always, and I think it's important to mention, not always gore. I'm only listing some of these. There are so many subgenres of horror, which is one of the things that I really like about it. It's so broad, but some of these subgenres include psychological horror, social horror, supernatural horror, slashers, folk horror, and more. There's so much to explore within this genre. And while we don't have the time to go through each of those subgenres, I think one of them could be an episode all on its own.
Mhm.
We would love to talk about why we love the genre, what aspects we like, what kinds of horror we lean toward, and also books that might be great to try if you don't have a lot of experience with the genre, but you're interested in trying it out. So I think we'll talk about some really fun stuff.
Yes, and I enjoyed thinking about, okay, when you think horror, it was fun to unpack really the different subgenres that exist. There's tons. I
Yeah.
came up with a short list that I'll share quickly about the ones that I tend to gravitate toward. I
Mm.
love coming of age horror, where especially if it's like kids do something bad when they're young and come back as adults for a reckoning. I like body horror for some reason because
Yes.
I'm a ghoul, where it's visceral descriptions of things that happen to characters' bodies. I love an evil house, but I am picky. I'm very picky with my haunted slash evil houses, but I love it when it's done well. I love
Mm-hmm.
historical horror and a little bit of creature feature, which is when it's like a vampire or ghosts or, monsters. And my final two are my most favorite: psychological horror and survival horror. Those are my
Oh,
faves. And a lot of times there's a
yeah.
lot of overlap. Sometimes you get like 4 or 5 of these elements all wrapped in one.
Yes, I would say that we have pretty much the same overlap. One of the subgenres that I am getting into is folk horror. I've been
Mm.
reading more within that, and I don't know a lot about it. In fact, I've been looking to Sadie Hartman because I think she has a lot of great recommendations for folk horror. And one that I really enjoy is a genre mashup where I don't read a lot of science fiction, but for whatever reason, sci fi horror is a genre that I just tend to really love. I'm thinking specifically of Jeff Vandermeer. I love his books.
Mhm.
They're weird science fiction, but also like freaking terrifying. So that is a genre that, even though I don't tend to lean towards sci-fi, that's a subgenre of sci-fi that I really enjoy.
When I was taking a look at Sadie's book, and she had talked about in the foreword about why she reads horror, and I swear to you,
Hmm.
like she had put it into words perfectly because she had said that she's not a risk taker, but gets her risks from reading horror. That couldn't
Yes.
be more me. I'm a cautious gal. I get made fun of because I'll look 100 times before crossing the street. I'm not one that needs the adrenaline rush, but I'm perfectly happy to sit at home and read my books. But that's where I get my high from, if you will, is reading books that scares me without actually having to take the risks. I find I'm able to really put myself in that situation and I love it because then I'm like, oh, but I'm in my cozy little bed.
Yeah. Yeah. And there have actually been studies that have shown that horror is a great outlet that allows you to experience fear in a controlled environment, whether that is through books,
Mm.
films, podcasts. We are willingly subjecting ourselves to scary scenarios, knowing that we are safe. And the thrill that you can get from reading horror, the thrill that I know that I get from reading horror comes from this controlled release of adrenaline. You get those heart racing moments of suspense, you get the unexpected twists. And sometimes a good resolution, sometimes not a great one that can ultimately leave you actually feeling relieved. It's like this kind of odd sense of escapism, but one that allows you to tap into these primal fears in a safe way. Like I said, there have been studies that have shown that reading and watching horror can actually help relieve anxiety, stress, paranoia, sleep issues like insomnia, etc.
Oh my gosh. And it's so funny. I was reading one of my books that I'm bringing today in the middle of the night because Cassia woke up and I was
Mhm.
like, oh, well, let me
Oh
just read a
gosh.
few pages. Nope. I went ahead and finished the book. It was so good. But then found myself kind of waking up every couple of, an hour or so. And I'm like, why am I not sleeping well? Probably because you were reading horror in the middle of the night, like a real ghoul. But it was such a good reading experience. Again, with the ghoul. I'm sorry. I
A
don't
real
know.
life
It's
goal.
this the theme of the episode, I suppose.
And every
I've
time you
always
say it, I still think of It's
and you
Always
still
Sunny
think
in
it's
Philadelphia.
funny. I know. That's what made me notice I said it again because you laughed. Um, I've always been someone that has liked sort of horror novels, if you will. I'm talking Goosebumps when I was a kid,
Oh,
R.L.
yeah.
Stein, Christopher Pike. Loved those books. And my entry point, you might argue, is not horror. It's the Sookie Stackhouse series, if you remember
Oh,
that
yeah.
from like the True Blood. I read all of those
Yes.
books. My God. And
Don't
that's
the
more
original
fantasy.
covers almost look
Yes,
like cozy mysteries, kind of?
they do. Yes.
Yeah.
They're more fantasy, but they have vampires and, others. But I finally found my way into Stephen King. That was my first horror author in about 2011. So
Mm.
again, realizing, looking at the list, I'm not as versed in authors outside of Stephen King. I've certainly have some that I've read and enjoyed, but I am excited to continue to read more. I always sort of give myself pause though, because I know obviously we run the podcast and I don't want to bring horror every episode because you guys will be like, come on,
Yeah.
like read something
Yeah.
else. So it's a balance of reading what I like and also reading what I think that will be interesting for the show. But I'm striking that balance, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I'm going to kind of move into some other things that I really like about horror that I think compel to a wider audience for people who might be curious about trying it, etc. But I really think that one of the special things about horror for me is its ability to use a lot of metaphorical horrors to address real life anxieties and societal issues. And we saw that a lot in We Came to Welcome You, which we just
Mm-hmm.
talked about. Whether it's the monster in Frankenstein symbolizing humanity's fear of unchecked scientific advancement, or the ghosts in The Haunting of Hill House reflecting, trauma and repression of its characters. Horror has this ability to use these supernatural or horrific elements or monsters or hauntings to explore really deeply personal and collective fears, and again, like in a more safe and controlled environment. And I think that there's so much that you can do creatively with horror to address those things. And as someone who just really enjoys the creative experience in general, I feel like this is a genre that has really impressed me over time with what it can do to capture a feeling or a fear or an anxiety, etc. And that's something that I have really appreciated from this genre specifically.
And I feel like you get a lot of creativity with this. You get it with a lot of genres, but in this one, I even though there's tropes, there's themes, there are things you can expect, there's rules, but also you get a lot of interesting elements that can be unexpected, and you won't know going into the book, like,
Hmm.
oh, like the book I'm talking about, I just finished. There was an element I was not expecting, but once I got there, I was like, wow, am I glad it's here?
Yes, I think that the magic in horror takes these unexpected elements. It kind of gives them this creative transformation that allows us to confront things in a more digestible and sometimes even cathartic way. It adds these layers to the story and can help us even, I feel like, process things in a way that feels distant and impactful. And I think that that's really hard to do, to have that separation, but then still actually be able to process it and think about it. And I think that that's really cool. So I'm glad that we both love and appreciate this genre.
Yes. I knew you loved it when I was talking to you in the beginning. So I was like, ooh, good. We'll have some good horror chats.
Yeah.
Brought a bunch of recommendations for you.
So I kind of put together a list in 3 categories: horror light. So horror books that we recommend if you're open to the genre, but not sold yet, and you want minimal scary. And then kind of a medium level. And then a list of books where, like, these are scary. These scared us. So I am just going to go through this list, and we'll, of course, link to all of these books in the show notes. But I thought that it would be helpful to have a place to start for those who
Mhm.
are curious and interested. So for horror light, I have When No One Is Watching by Alyssa Cole. This barely has any horror elements, but leans into a thriller vibe as well. The Winter People by Jennifer McMahon. This is historical fiction, and it is rich historical fiction, but it does have some ghost haunting elements. Coraline by Neil Gaiman. This is middle grade, so this is technically a children's book, but it definitely has that creepy factor. Misery by Stephen King. I felt like this was kind of barely scary, mostly fun, some gore and creepy elements, but also almost funny. Devolution by Max Brooks. This is a fun monster horror that has a secluded setting, and it has like this Bigfoot storyline. So it's one that you don't have to take too seriously. It's mostly, again, fun. And then The Changeling by Victor Laval, which leans into a weird quest adventure story, but is pretty slow moving and not too scary overall. Tina, do you have any books to add to this horror light list?
Yes, and I feel that I am always bad at like deciding how creepy a book is because I'm like,
Yeah.
it takes a minute for me to decide. But the two I would add, one is The Return by Rachel Harrison. It is her
Mm.
debut, and you have a friend that's been missing for years and comes back significantly changed. I also added The Sundown Motel by Simone St. James, where a girl fears that the hotel she works at is haunted.
Yes, I think that Rachel Harrison, in general, from what I have read from her, is a great segue into horror. I feel
Hmm.
like her books have those creepy elements, but are not like, they don't kind of cross that border into horror almost. So I think that that's a really good recommendation. So for medium level scary, these stories I feel provide a really strong foundation in horror without being overly intense. I feel like these books balance suspense and horror with compelling storytelling. We have The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. I thought that this one was definitely creepy in parts, but it's also a character study and it's a book in general that focuses on its characters. And I feel like that's kind of the highlight. Mexican Gothic by Sylvia Marino Garcia. This is one that, again, it's that haunted house setting, but it never gets too intense or too scary, mostly just creepy. The Book of Accidents by Chuck Wendig. This is reminiscent of Stephen King. I think that if you have enjoyed his books but want to try someone else, this would be a great option. The scarier moments are few and far between. It's mostly a family story. The Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay. This is post apocalyptic. It has that, what did you call it, Tina? Survival horror?
Survival horror.
Yeah, I feel like this is definitely a survival horror. I actually, a disclaimer, didn't love this book. It's pretty polarizing, but I think that it's one that's great to read in discussion because there are some choices that are made that are pretty wild. It's really intense, has some gore, but it's ultimately not too high on the scary scale and definitely has some really fun discussion points. And then I'll also recommend Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer. If you like science fiction and want something weird and scary, I think this is a great one that you can read as a standalone, or you can read the whole series if you are a series reader as well.
Yeah, such a great recommendation list. The only two that I added is Pen Pal by Dathan Auerbach.
Mm.
Supremely creepy, unsettling. You're in a forest. It is a slow burn that'll get you in the end. And then The Reformatory by Tananarive Due for more social horror. That one was so good. I finished that last year.
I'm glad that you brought both of those. I still need to read The Reformatory, so I wasn't able to put it on this list, but it is one that I have a feeling I am going to love.
You will.
So, and I
I'm
know that
calling
it's
it.
one that, yes, that so many people have loved. So
Mhm.
I'm glad that that book is on this list. So, and now I'm going to share, and again, some of this is subjective. Like sometimes
Yes.
I'm like, I don't know if what I think is really scary is going to be super scary for everyone, but these are the books that I feel like are the scariest books that I have read. I have The Troop by Nick Cutter. This is basically nonstop body horror and it's in a secluded setting as well.
Yes.
Again, I am not too affected negatively by body horror, but I think that on an objective scale, like this one is pretty nonstop gross. There are also some instances of animal violence and some other things that just make this one, I feel like, really intense. I also put Pet Cemetery by Stephen King and The Shining by Stephen King on here. I feel like those are the two Stephen King books that I have read that were the scariest. Pet Cemetery is grief horror that is just terrifying. And The Shining is a haunted house story. It's a very classic. I think everybody has either seen the movie or read the book, but I remember certain moments in The Shining so viscerally that are so scary. There's a scene with a fire hydrant that I remember like closing the book and opening it and being like, this fire hydrant is messing with me. Um,
Yeah.
and then Brother by Anya Alborn, which is a really wild story about a cannibalistic family. And then Bird Box by Josh Mallerman. I think that this is one that, although isn't I want to say it's not like objectively the scariest book I've ever read, but it's post-apocalyptic. It's post-apocalyptic horror that really plays with your five senses. And I thought that that was such a creative way to make something scary that I had to put this on this list because the characters are blindfolded a lot of the time in this one, and I felt like that made it so much scarier. Um, so yeah, those are the books that I put on this list where if you are a horror reader and you want something to scare you, those are books that I have read that I think might do the trick.
Yes, good recommendations. I read some of them. The Troop
Mhm.
absolutely belongs on this scary list.
Yeah.
The one of the ones I'm sharing today is definitely along the same lines. One that I would add to this is A Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay. That was one of the very
Mhm.
first books that I remember being like, "Oh, this actually scared me." Like there's still a scene that I can think about. And yeah, we maybe we'll share a graphic with all of these titles on our Instagram or something because we want to link to them all, but obviously that's
Yeah.
going to be challenging with our limited character availability in the show notes.
But we can at least maybe list them and then we'll share them on
That's what,
social
yeah,
if we can't.
we
Yeah.
can list them. We'll share them somewhere. Of course, if you're like, what was that book? We can tell you. But hopefully, this encourages you to at least pick up a horror book. Or if you're looking for more recommendations, I have a feeling we could do this for a while. But
Yes.
we do have
I
four
tried to
more
pare
to
it down.
share. Yeah, no, for sure. And like, it's so funny because I was like, let me just add one or two that I really want to get out there because you did a good job with getting a good variety. We have four more to share today. They're the ones that we just finished for this episode. My first book that I read for our spooky, scary episode is Horror Movie by Paul Tremblay. Speaking of, and this is a twist on the cursed film genre. And it's interesting because in this book, you're flashing back to 1993 when a group of young filmmakers spent 4 weeks making horror movie, and it was a notorious, disturbing art house horror flick. But the weird part is only three of the film's scenes were ever released to the public. But there's this really kind of underground, rabid fan base for this movie. And then the book also picks up 3 decades later, which is like present day, where Hollywood is pushing for a big budget reboot. The man who played the thin kid is the only surviving cast member. He remembers all too well the secrets buried within the original screenplay, the bizarre events of filming, and the dangerous lines crossed. And you sort of follow him as he gets courted by these Hollywood folks that want to remake the film. You flash back to when they're actually filming it. And I thought this was really interesting. I would almost call this psychological horror because you are, as the reader, kind of reading along, knowing things ended badly, but not knowing why. Obviously, there's a reason this movie was never released, but you're kind of trying to figure it out. I did the audio, highly recommend the audio. It was a fantastic production. The main character, the thin kid, was narrated by Ari Falakos, who's my all time favorite narrator. So I was so happy to see him. I didn't know he narrated it. But they do a really interesting thing. Like, for example, when they're reading through their lines on the audio, you can hear them like
Oh yeah.
turning the pages. You can hear them retrying. You can hear them redo their lines, kind of like I just did. It's cool. They do this really interesting thing with the audio, and it is a slower pace. I will say that I liked the audio and I liked all of these elements, but I was kind of like, where are we headed? I couldn't quite put my finger on sometimes the exact place we were in. And it sort of feels like a villain origin story because you're not quite sure about this thin man. You're like, what has he been up to for the past 30 years? But it's also a confessional because he's talking to you as the reader. I enjoyed this a lot. I think this could be a good entry point into horror. In my opinion, it wasn't too gory. I would place this in the medium category, though. It wasn't light, but it definitely was not in the super scary part. It was unsettling. And I remember Jonathan came home. I was doing something and the girls were sleeping. He came home and surprised me. And I was like, ah, because I was reading this book and the vibes were right. I was creeped out. But I thought this was a really good mix of sort of vibey reading as well as plot. I still really loved his book, A Head Full of Ghosts, but I am glad that I gave this one a shot and I recommend it. It is Horror Movie by Paul Tremblay.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of reviews across the board for this
Yeah.
one. I definitely think that it's one that sounds interesting just alone, like the whole aspect of the movie and having like the script involved.
It was
And I
cool.
just think that sounds, yeah, creative and fun. So, okay, my first book that I read for this is one that I have been meaning to read for a long time, and that is Ring Shout by P. Jelly Clark. So this is a horror novella, and I think that I would place this on the medium to scary scale, like maybe in between. I don't know. I feel like there were definitely parts of this one that were pretty scary. And this is a book that's set in 1915, and it is about the birth of a nation, which is a clan organization, and they cast a spell across America, swelling the clan's ranks and drinking deep from the darkest thoughts of white folks. All across the nation, they ride, they spread fear and violence among the vulnerable, and they are literally planning to bring hell to earth. And we are following in this story Marcy and her fellow resistance fighters, a foul mouthed sharpshooter and a Harlem hellfighter. They are armed and ready to hunt their hunters and send the demons straight to hell. But something awful is brewing in Macon, and the war on hell is about to heat up. I mostly took that from the blurb because I feel like it summarizes it really well and also gives that immediate vibe that although this book is tackling a very, very serious issue, it also in parts is not to be taken too seriously. Like there's almost a little bit of a satirical element to it,
Yep.
which I think is kind of brought out in that synopsis there. This book is short, it is fierce, it is propulsive. A lot of action happens in this book. I think this might be the most action-packed horror book that I have read. The imagery was really visceral, really creepy, and I felt the fear of our characters as they approached these really terrifying and like personally terrifying scenarios. I found the concept of these interdimensional monsters feeding off of hate really interesting, and I really liked the way the author included music in the story as well. But I do wish the author had made the concepts a little more conceptual in general and a little less heavy handed. The dialogue as well sometimes came off as a little bit cheesy. The villains didn't have like really complex motivation other than hunger for hate. So that part felt a little bit shallow, maybe. However, that's also just a personal preference. And I know that this was also a really short book. Overall, I really enjoyed it. I think it takes a lot of talent to write such an exciting, creative, and impactful story with a few words. And I think that this was a success. I think that if you are a fantasy reader or a historical fiction reader who is a proponent of incorporating social justice into your reading and your life, and you want to read something scary for the Halloween season, but in just a small dose, this could be a good fit for you. And that is Ring Shout by P. Jelly Clark.
Well done. I read that a while ago and kind of felt the same way. I
Yeah.
enjoy listening to you review books that I've already read because I'm like, oh yeah,
Oh, fun.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the same thing. Yeah, I enjoyed it, and it is on Sadie's list of 101 books to read
Oh,
before you
perfect.
die. Yeah,
Yeah. I
so
think it
it's
definitely is a great one
very
to have on there.
very plotty. You are absolutely right. So yeah,
Yes.
packs a lot into not very long.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm,
He really does. I think that adventure stories aren't ones that I read a
hmm
ton, but I'm wondering if I shouldn't. I don't remember if I mentioned this one above, but another one that I really enjoyed is this Own Voices horror novella, River of Teeth by Sarah Gailey. And again, it's this social horror. It's really short, super action packed. I really enjoyed that one. So maybe this is kind of a subgenre of horror that I could get into, is this like action adventure horror novellas. So if you have any recommendations, feel free to send them my way.
Hit us up. Okay. Now, finally, I get to talk about the dang book I've been teasing all episode. It was The
Oh, yeah.
Ruins by Scott Smith, and I love this book. 5 stars. Goodbye. I'm sent. I loved it so much, and I'm so happy. I've had this book on my shelf for a long time. I don't know what made me grab it for this. We'll call it the universe brought it to me because I needed a good one. And this book is about a group of friends who are on a vacation in Cancun. they decide, they make the very flawed decision while they're there. They befriend a bunch of other people that are vacationing, which isn't their bad decision. But then one of them says, "Hey, my brother met up with this girl and they went to an archaeological dig in the jungle a couple hours away from Cancun. Do you guys want to take a bus and head there?" And they're like, "Sure." Because they are young. They are in between college and their real life. They're in that summer in between and they think nothing can touch them. So they decide to go into the Mexican jungle. And guess what? They don't bring very many supplies because they thought it was going to just be a quick trip. Grab his brother, bring him back. But they run into a horror unlike anything they could have ever imagined. What started out as a fun day trip slowly spirals into a nightmare. I'll leave it there. This was absolutely unsettling. I loved this book with my whole heart because you're reading on and it's these two couples, right? Two boy girl couples, and then this guy they call the Greek, and then their tour guide. And the five of them just sort of, or six of them, whatever, sort of just go off on this adventure, not really thinking things through. And all of a sudden they're literally stranded. And you're just sitting there like, guys, this is such a bad decision. Are you out of your mind? Like, what would make you do this? It's one of those books where every page things keep getting worse and worse and worse. Like, oh my God, this, now that. And the author did a really interesting thing with the writing style because you get the point of view of the four main characters, the ones that are in the relationship with each other, and you're hearing from them, but it's not like every chapter switches. It sort of just floats in and out into their consciousness, which I kind of quite
Interesting.
liked because it kept you in the moment and
Hmm.
you would see something happen, but then you would see it from this point of view. Then you would see it from this guy's point of view, and you sort of got more perspective. I thought it was so good. This was making me so glad that I am a cautious person because I could never, like, never would I go off on an adventure like this. And okay, something I had said, I did a little in the moment video when I was reading it. I'm like, this book is so wild. It's not super gory yet, but I think the gore is coming. Oh, it comes. Yes, yes, indeed. This would go on the more intense horror. So, not for the squeamish reader, because by the end, even me, I was like, oh dear, oh dear, you're going to go there. I can't say enough good things. I had such a fun time. I love this book. It came out in like 2005 too. So I'm sure you can get it at the library, no waiting. Highly recommend. What a blast. This was The Ruins by Scott Smith.
Oh gosh, you did such a good job talking about that
I
one.
love this
I
book.
read this a long time
You
ago.
did?
Like, yeah, like 2016, I want to
Mm-hmm.
say. It was like right when I started doing Bookstagram or a little bit before. And I don't really remember it at
Yeah.
all. So hearing you talk
Oh,
about it was so fun. What a
I
good refresher.
loved it. These
It's
ding
like a,
dongs.
it's almost kind of a creative take on a haunted house story too, because even though it's not a house, it's a cave,
They're
but
not
it's still that,
they're in like
or is that,
they're on the mountain. Yeah, there's a
oh,
cave and
okay.
yeah, they're on a mountain and it's definitely a survival horror. It's also not a
Yes.
locked room mystery, but it's like isolation horror because they're stuck
Oh,
there.
yeah.
And like there's reasons and you figure things out, but like, oh my God. And it's so fun because you kept wanting to shake the various characters at
Yeah,
each
of course.
one of the turns, and they sort of it's tongue in cheek because the author would say they have this argument about, well, you're the hero, well, you're this one, you're this archetype, and they sort of like are arguing with each other. People also told me that there's an adaptation of this, so I might check it out. Not that I ever watch movies, but maybe I will.
Yeah, it might be fun.
Good tie-in for fall.
Good tie-in. Okay. So I am going to wrap this up
Wrap it up.
with one that is kind of hard to talk about because it is a short story collection, and that is At Home with the Horrors by Sammy Scott. This is one that I feel like I saw a lot last year, kind of popping around on various horror readers' lists of books that they were reading. And I was really curious about it. I am so glad that I picked this up. This short story collection explores both the natural and the supernatural, the alien and the ghostly, the chilling and the horrific. These are 14 diversions that first root themselves in the mundanity of everyday life before they extend their branches into the all things horror. And that was definitely a similar element that ran through all of these stories. The author brings the nightmares into one place where we should feel the safest. And then when it comes to the horror, he proves that grief, loss, and guilt can be just as terrifying as the ghosts and the ghouls, as Tina loves to tell us. Okay, so I don't read a ton of short story collections, but when I do, I love horror short story collections. Although I do consider myself a horror reader, I don't necessarily consider myself like an expert, and I'm still learning what I do and don't like. And I feel like short stories are such a great exploration of that in general. I I liked these stories too because they didn't have to make sense. And for once in my life, I was okay with that. And I felt like these stories did such a good job of kind of suspending that part of who I am, of wanting everything to make sense and kind of logicking my way out of certain things in books. A lot of these stories didn't necessarily have to say a profound thing in a short amount of time to be fun and scary and give me that WTF reaction that sometimes I want when I go into horror and short stories like these. But some of them were really profound. And I liked that it kind of held that mix. Not all of these stories were complete hits for me, but several of them in the collection I have already reread. I had Dustin read a couple of them because they had really fun endings or really weird premises or were just really creative with their storytelling. This book is also available on Kindle Unlimited, which I love because if you have that subscription service, you can even get this book and just read a couple of the stories if you want to dabble. I'm going to talk about a couple of my favorites in the collection in case you're curious and want to try them out, even standing on their own. There was a short story called Becca, which was really weird and creepy and had this really interesting ending. Peeping Tom was one of the most creative stories in the collection. It was really weird. And when I got to the ending, I was like, I have no idea what I just read, but I'm still thinking about it like every day after reading it. Scared Mary has this TV show YouTube channel tie in that made it so scary. This one was almost fun, if you can say that about a horror story like this one. And then there was also one called Catherine that I thought had a really great ending. And this was one of the more, one of the richer stories in terms of its themes and kind of concepts that it discussed. So I think that if you're looking for something like that, then you might enjoy the short story Catherine. The end story is the longest one in the collection, and I will also say it was my least favorite. But the rest of them were anywhere between 4 and 5 stars, with the exception of maybe one or two. Overall, this was basically a 5-star book for me because of how much I enjoyed so many of the stories. And that was At Home with the Horrors by Sammy Scott.
Good. Wow. A short story collection. I don't know that we
I
bring very many
know.
of these.
Who are we?
I mean, well, how fun. All right. Well, I am going to stay on theme here, and I'm bringing a horror novel that, because of Sadie's book, reemerged in my consciousness because I think I had a copy or knew about it, but I forgotten about it, and I want to pick it up now. It's called The Year of the Witching by Alexis Henderson. Came out in 2020. And so it's a witching novel. I've sort of been into witches lately. And this is set in the lands of Bethel, where the prophet's word is law. Emmanuel Moore's very existence is blasphemy. Her mother's union with an outsider of a different race cast her once proud family into disgrace. So Emmanuel does her best to worship the Father, follow the holy protocol, and lead a life of submission, devotion, and absolute conformity, as she should as a proper woman. Then a mishap lures her into the forbidden dark wood surrounding Bethel, where the first prophet once chased and killed 4 powerful witches, and the spirits are still lurking there, and they bestow a gift on her. The journal of her dead mother, who she's shocked to find, also sought sanctuary in this wood. She becomes fascinated by the secrets of the diary and finds herself struggling to understand how her mother could have consorted with these witches. But when she begins to learn grim truths about the church and its history, she realizes the true threat to Bethel is in its own darkness, and she starts to realize that if her community is going to change, it must begin with her. So, I don't know, sounds good to me. I'll read it. And it also says up top Bethel #1. So I'm wondering if there is more to this story. Yeah. looks like there is a book 2 coming out next year. Well, did you read this?
Yeah, I did. And I would definitely put this kind of in the horror light category of if you enjoy historical fiction or kind of culty novels, but want something a little bit on this, like just a little bit scary. I definitely think that this is a great fit. It almost felt young adult, not in a bad way, just the characters are in their teens and it's definitely a little bit lighter on the scary scale, but I really enjoyed this one and definitely recommend it. So I hope.
Awesome. Well, this one is The Year of the Witching by Alexis Henderson.
Perfect. So my shelf edition, I'm second guessing a little bit because it is not on theme. But
it doesn't matter. I just like to because my brain feels nice when I'm like, okay, everything goes together. Goodbye.
That makes sense.
But maybe we can reward the listeners if they've made it this far and hung.
If you've made it this far.
Yes.
Yes. If you've made it this far and you're not a horror reader, but you just like to listen to us yap, I'm going to reward you with something totally different. And that is Stanley Tucci's new memoir, which comes out on October 15th. So you don't have to wait that long for this one to come out, about a week when this episode airs. And I love foodie nonfiction and foodie memoirs. And this is one where he literally took everything that he ate. Oh yeah, I should probably mention the title of it. It's What I Ate in 1 Year by Stanley Tucci. And this is where he records 12 months of his eating, ranging from the mouth-wateringly memorable to the comfortingly domestic to the infuriatingly inedible. And I just love Stanley Tucci. And I think I'm going to listen to this one because I want his voice in my ears. And I'm excited to read something comforting. And that is What I Ate in 1 Year by Stanley Tucci. And this one comes out on October 15th.
My God, we need a nice comfort read after everything we
sure
have
do
shared.
Sometimes.
After everything we shared, all this ghoul and gore. But
we contain multitudes.
We do. That's it for today. We thank you for spending a part of your day with us. Links to all the books mentioned can be found in the show notes. And if you enjoyed today's episode, you can help us by following us wherever you listen and by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. It helps us get our show out to new listeners and grows our audience. And don't forget, if you would like access to exclusive bonus content and community, you can join us for $5 a month on patreon.com/booktalk, etc.
If you'd like to connect with us, you can email us at booktalk.etc@gmail.com. You can also connect with us both at Booktalk Etc. on Instagram and Tina at TBR Etc. and Hannah at Handpicked Books. Talk to you next week. And in the meantime, remember,
everything's better with books.
And ghouls.
And ghouls. Good one.
Nice.
Good one.